It starts with one thing. I don't know why. It doesn't even matter how hard you try. Keep that in mind. I designed this rhyme to explain in due time. All I know, time is a valuable thing. Watch it fly by as a pendulum swings. Watch it count down to the end of the day. The clock takes life away. It's so unreal. Better look out below. Watch the time go right out the window. Try to hold on. They didn't even know. Wasted it all just to watch you go. Everything inside, and even though I tried, it all fell apart. One of is a me, relevant to leave me a memory of a time when I tried to so hard. It got so far, but in the end, it doesn't even matter. I had to fall to lose it all, but in the end, it doesn't even matter. One thing, I don't know why, it doesn't even matter how hard you try. Keep that in mind. I designed this rhyme to remind myself how I tried so hard. Fighting the way you were mocking me. It's acting like I was fighting your property. Remember me, all the times you fought with me. I'm surprised they got it so. Things aren't the way they were before. You wouldn't even recognize me anymore. Not that you know me like that, but it all comes back to me.
Yo, are we waiting for the next person to join or what?
Kind of, yeah, I just started. I've been banned for a week.
Yeah, we're... All right, I got something for you.
What's that?
All right. If the Israelites were monotheistic, right?
Uh-huh.
Why in their Bible, right, in the Torah, does the commandments go like this? All right, the first commandment is, you shall have no other gods before me. Gods, plural, before me. Meaning, like I'm just saying, Israelites weren't monotheistic until relatively late in the Second Temple period.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Holy God. People love that genetic fallacy. Doesn't matter. It doesn't even matter. I'm a Funko Pop.
And what about that? Can we be sure of that?
No, but it's more likely than not. We can't be 100% sure. It's just more probable than not.
Okay, so we can't.
What about that?
What about that phrase itself? Can you be sure of that?
No, it's just more likely than not. That's the point.
Okay, so you're caught in. Yeah, now you're caught in a regress.
You're in an infinite regress of trying to get out of making 100% absolute statements by throwing another one out there and another one, in which case the whole thing crumbles. And there's no reason to believe anything you're saying.
Is that right?
The transcendental argument for God objectively proves Christianity. So I could put the argument on screen. It's like a real simple... version of the argument. If knowledge, then God. Knowledge exists. God exists. That would be the argument. We would say that God's a necessary precondition for knowledge.
It's not practical to be a Pyrrhonist, right? It's not practical not to believe in anything. That's the problem.
Well, but the point
you just don't have any good reasons.
the point is that you don't have any good reasons to believe in anything at all, much less agnosticism.
How do you not believe in agnosticism? If you don't believe in anything at all,
I'm saying you don't have a good reason to tell us that agnosticism is what we ought to believe. You just refuted your own basis for agnosticism.
But the problem when you say that like the Bible is fiction, when you say the Bible's fiction, it's like what authority are you appealing to? Because if the Bible's not the authoritative word of God, then it's like what authority is there? The authority of science? But science can't even prove science, so it's not really an authority. Oh my God. No, we can see to even do science, Christianity is necessary to get science off the ground. I did not graduate college.
isn't it? So what is someone supposed to believe as a default, so to speak? I mean,
So we're just showing the absurdity of the non-theistic worldview, which is what you appear to hold, that it makes knowledge impossible. It's a defeater for knowledge.
Maybe you can't justify all the knowledge you have. You can know exactly why you have
you can't justify any knowledge is the point. Any claim you make, given.
So yeah, dude, I did answer your question. You said what objectively proves God? So look on screen, right? Where is it? This is the argument. It's called the transcendental argument for God. That's the proof. That's a proof right there. It's a deductive argument. Well, it's not technically deductive, but it's kind of deductive.
So why would I listen to you about why would I listen to your arguments about your account of history and the Hebrew?
The basis of P1. So like knowledge is going to require a coherent worldview, and only Christians have a coherent worldview. Your worldview is like your foundation upon which you build your knowledge. The Christian God, duh. Demonstrate what? So for example, knowledge, for there to be knowledge, there has to be like uniformity of nature. It does make sense. You got to put on your thinking cap a little bit. So like A.E. Taylor, in discussing the question of the uniformity of nature, says that the fundamental thought of modern science is that there's a universal reign of law throughout nature, that nature is rational in the sense that it has everywhere a coherent pattern, which we can progressively detect by a steady application of our own intelligence to the scrutiny of natural processes. So science has been built up along the basis of this principle of the uniformity of nature, and the principle is one which science itself has no means of demonstrating. No one could possibly prove its truth to an opponent who seriously disputed it. For all attempts to produce evidence of the uniformity of nature presuppose the very principle they are intended to prove. So God, the Christian God of theism and the conception of his council as controlling all things in the universe is the only presupposition which can account for the uniformity of nature, which the scientist needs to do science. So, like, for you to even type in the chat, there has to be uniformity of nature. And without the God of Christian theism and this conception or idea that his counsel controls all things in the universe, we'd have no reason to think that nature was uniform. Right? He's the God is the, what the heck is this? Yo, what is, what in the hell? What the hell is that? I forgot what I was saying. Knowledge requires uniformity of nature. Only Christianity can account for the uniformity of nature. So, anyways.
And Jewish Messiah and all this revelation and whatnot, when I don't have any kind of coherent argument from you about how knowledge is even possible.
I don't think you have an explanation that's any better.
Well, I don't from the outset propose things that make knowledge impossible, and you do. So I'm in a much better position.
I mean, someone could argue that your beliefs also seem kind of absurd in many ways, because the world seems to be, I mean, this is old stuff that I didn't come up with, but the world seems very unjust, for example, right? Like the wicked prosper and the good people suffer. So this idea that you've got a God
and what is your standard for justice?
It's an internal critique of your view. I'm not taking
an internal critique is not a standard for justice.
Yeah, but I'm saying your own worldview seems.
You're not in a position to critique my worldview when you don't have a basis for knowledge at all, because you're using things that are unjustified on your worldview, like logic. What's your account of logic?
I don't even need that. If it's an internal critique, it's like you can tell.
No, you do need that. So you can't even do you can't do an internal critique without relying on something like a principle of logic.
You can tell a Protestant, for example, that sola scriptura is not.
So this is like some move they'll try and do sometimes to avoid the transcendental argument, where they'll say, "Oh, I'm just doing an internal critique on your position." Actually, I should write this down. This is good. I should note this because this comes up sometimes. Oh, I don't need to justify logic because I'm doing an internal critique on your position. Okay, but as Jay Dyer just pointed out, to do an internal critique requires a principle of logic. So even to do an internal critique, they require a starting point from which they use to explain reality. They think they can get out of it. Basically, the only way they can get out of it is when they just like go, "Well, I'm a Christian now, but I don't know the argument. Can you explain the argument? But I'm a Christian." So their only way out of like defending their position is just to basically admit they're a Christian and then try and like, this is what they'll do sometimes. they'll come on stage and be like, I'm a Christian, but I don't think you can prove Christianity. It's like, well, what Christian thinks? I guess there are Christians maybe that think that, so, but it's kind of goofy.
Not in Scripture. You don't need to be able to believe in Scripture to see that.
Now, that's a false analogy because doing an internal critique still presupposes some usage of logic to make the critique. He left.
No, I just need to use your logic. I don't even need to believe
There is
in
no
logic
such thing
myself,
as
right?
there's no such thing as my logic. That's not even my logic. No, logic is not my system. Logic is a universal category that's used for all argumentation. So you're absolutely wrong. Do you understand that to make a critique, even if it's an internal critique, you're still assuming logic?
You could be arguing against logic by saying that by making an argument that logic has no foundation, for example.
Correct. Yeah. Aristotle points out that that's self-refuting. But that's not a justification for logic, which you're...
I'm not saying I'm justifying logic. I'm saying even if I can't explain certain things...
No, you can't explain that. You're not even missing... You're not getting... You can't make sentences. You're not in a position to justify the usage and making of sentences. It's even more radical than that. So why should I listen to anything that proceeds from your mouth when your worldview has no account for logic, sentences, meaning at all?
Good question. It's a good question.
I mean, most people would say that...
Appealing to
Most people would say. Well, it seems like... Well, my buddy at the coffee shop, who has really good grades in physics, would say... welcome.
Hey, how you doing?
I'm doing well.
Good, good. So I just questioned the first one. At what point do you feel like it's objectively proven?
I think the transcendental argument, it's like a philosophical proof, would objectively prove Christianity.
What is that argument that objectively proves it?
So it's like a meta argument where we're gonna say like, we both have a starting point for or foundation we use to describe reality. Everyone has this, and then we're gonna ask the question like, whose starting point can account for the things necessary to make an argument? And I would say only the Christian starting point, like Christ as the foundation to describe reality, truth, reason. Only with that starting point could we even debate. Because like any other non-Christian starting point would make debate impossible.
Well, not necessarily, because if all your starting point was the same and we knew the starting point was the same, there wouldn't be a debate. There would never be a question.
No, the debate is over who's starting, because God is a starting. I start with Jesus. That's my first principle.
But that doesn't objectively prove it. That's your opinion.
Okay, right.
Objective proof is I can't deny it.
You don't start with Jesus, right?
No, I'm an atheist.
Right. So we go, I assume your position, if you don't start with Jesus, it leads to absurdity. But if we assume Jesus, then we can have like a coherent system where we could have satisfy the preconditions to make debate possible.
But that's not objective proof.
It is proof.
It's not proof. That's an opinion.
It's not.
If it was proven and it was objectively proven, there would be no denial.
Okay, it's objective because everyone has to explain how debate's possible, right?
Yep.
That's if only Christians can explain how debate's possible, that's an objective proof.
No, it's not, because it's your opinion on how debate is possible.
It's not my opinion.
That is your opinion. Your opinion is that Jesus started everything, therefore that is the reason we have the opinion to debate.
For example, look, to debate there has to be uniformity of nature, right? For you to even talk, there has to be uniformity of nature.
Yep.
So I can explain uniformity of nature because I have a God who, like, through his plan, controls the universe and sees to it that there's going to be uniformity of nature. You can't. What?
No, that's not how that works. You can't just be like, okay, so I believe this. What I'm trying to say to you is if you're saying Christianity is objectively proven, you have to prove that Christianity is there with no question marks and there is no possibility for anything else to occur. That's what objectively proving Christianity would be, not can I debate or not.
A proof. We prove things with arguments.
Well, then objectively prove Christianity to be true.
That's what I'm doing. I'm making an argument.
No, you're saying my opinion is Jesus started everything, therefore it's true.
No, I'm making an argument. I'm saying there's a necessary relationship between Christianity and the uniformity of nature, and the uniformity of nature is necessary for you to talk. So for you to talk, Christianity has to be true.
No.
Yes. How can you talk? How do you explain the uniformity of nature without Jesus?
Because you don't need Jesus for it.
Well, then explain it.
So what do you want me to explain the entirety of the Big Bang and how we became to be and how that whole process went?
I want you to justify that the future resembles the past, that when you drop a pencil, that it's going to fall to the ground.
Well, yes, that's called gravity. It's how a force works. It pulls things towards the Earth.
Yeah, but you have to justify that the future resembles the
Which
past.
you can, because you can test gravity. You can't test for Jesus.
But that assumes what you're trying to prove.
No.
Yes.
Because you can prove it, which is the point of objectively proving something. I can prove that the pen is going to fall to the floor before I've done it because I know that the pen is going to fall because gravity will cause that to happen. What you're saying is I can prove Jesus, but I can't do anything to actually prove Jesus, but Jesus was the reason.
Well, we have two problems here. One is you're stubborn, and two is you're really ignorant.
Not really. It's just that's what logic is. Logic is going, okay, I can logically see how this happens.
I just gave
therefore I know it will happen.
But I just gave you an argument, and you're acting like stubborn instead of dealing with the argument. You're just being stubborn.
Well, no. Arguing is when you say a point and I have a counterpoint to it. Or you're doing.
Your counter argument. I said Christianity.
Counter argument is showing me where you need Jesus for that.
Christianity can explain the uniformity of nature. How do you explain the uniformity of nature without Christianity? That's my argument, right?
Evolution and the Big Bang, which again is testable.
But that's
testable.
But that's a lie. So
do you know what that is? That is objectively proven.
So I know you're lying, you know you're lying, and everyone listening knows you're lying.
Oh, I mean, there's a comment straight away. Mean of escape.
What?
I mean, look at the comments.
Well, you're just lying though. But so what are we gonna do?
What have I lied about? Be one thing I've lied about.
Now you're lying about lying?
No, I'm saying you've said I've lied. Tell me where I lied.
Would you want to talk to someone who just lies to you?
Let's just tell me where I've lied. It's real simple. You can.
I did tell you where you lied. I don't know why they want to come up here and lie. Just a bunch of liars. It's not really fun when you lie, dude. Boom, boom. It's like they're so ignorant and stubborn at the same time. It's like I don't really want to talk to you because you're lying to me. Do you want to?
I'm going to give you once again. Where did I lie? That's all I'm saying. Just tell me where I lied.
Well, when you're ready to admit that you lied, we can.
No. Just where.
Oh, welcome, Walter.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Alright, sorry, I'm in bed right now. But I saw this live. Objectively proven? Prove it.
Sure. Christianity, so for you to even talk, right?
Sure.
There has to be uniformity of nature.
Yeah, what do you mean when you say uniformity of nature?
I mean, when you touch a hot stove and you burn your hand, you go, well, in the future, when I touch a hot stove, I'll burn my hand because nature is uniform, the future resembles the past. There's like a connection between past events and future events, so that like if I drop my pencil in the past, it falls to the ground. So I'm gonna go, well, in the future, when I drop my pencil, it'll fall to the ground.
So you mean like you can do stuff and like learn it? Is that what you're saying?
You believe that the future resembles the past. That's what I'm saying. That's how you reason. You reason
Okay.
based off that.
And that has to do with proving Christianity how?
Because we can only explain that the future will resemble the past if the Christian God like controls the universe and makes it that way.
Why? Why can't I just say that
Yeah,
that's just the way it is?
Well, but that's losing. Then you just lost.
How?
Because we're in a debate and you have to give reasons for things.
Okay, so your reason is that's the way it is because of God, and mine is that's the way it is because that's the way it is. Oh, wait, here, let me take a different stance.
That's losing the debate. That's called losing the debate.
Let me take a different stance here.
Okay.
The future resembles the past because of Buddhism.
Okay. I'm looking to talk to serious people.
You see what I'm saying, right?
Okay.
I just said what you said, but a different God.
Yeah, but I'm looking to talk to serious people, so if you don't want to be serious, I mean, that's cool.
You can't just kick everyone that proves you wrong. You just kicked the last guy. I saw that too.
How does that prove me wrong? You don't even believe in Buddhism, so that's bad faith. You're arguing for something you don't believe in. That's called bad faith.
Explain why God can prove your argument, but not mine.
Buddhism doesn't have a God for one, so that shows how ignorant you are, right? And
Okay.
I easily show that.
Okay, it's that way because of Satan.
Thanks for coming.
Yeah, kick me.
I'll just ask you again. Where did I lie?
I'm only going to talk to you if you admit that you lied.
Sorry?
I'm only going to talk to you if you admit that you lied.
Well, if I don't know what the lie was, then I don't know if I've lied or not. That's what I'm asking you. Well, what?
He did lie. I asked him how he can justify the uniformity of nature, and he said the evolution Big Bang. That is a lie.
You weak, pathetic fool.
It is a lie. You lie. Why you lie to me? I'm not. What I do to you? Hey, why you lie? Why you lie to me? Don't lie. That's mean. You hurt my feelings. They hurt my feelings. It hurts. On the inside, it's where it hurts.
People, I want to know. I mean, what do you say? It's like that's a fallacy. Most people would say this. Most people. What do you say?
What I would say is that it seems like you're just sort of trying to reframe the debate. Like, whenever someone asks you a question and you say, well, what's your worldview? I mean, this was a specific stuff.
He says, all I'm doing is assuming things. That's the whole point. Everyone has what are known as metaphysical assumptions. You have metaphysical assumptions. I have metaphysical assumptions. Guess what? God is a metaphysical assumption. Yeah. So how do we know who has the correct metaphysical assumption? Well, we have to compare metaphysical assumptions because metaphysical assumptions are the things we use to evaluate and interpret reality. So we can't use a correspondence theory of truth. We can't prove a metaphysical assumption like we prove a scientific fact or some rational proof like math. To prove a metaphysical assumption, We need a transcendental argument. The whole point of transcendental arguments are to prove metaphysical assumptions. So tag proves God as the only necessary, unique. Christianity is the unique metaphysical assumption necessary to have a coherent worldview. Because only Christians can account for things like logic, science, truth, morality, beauty, causality, reliability of senses, cognitive functions. Objective means it's a true because it's a fact of the world. Yeah. I'm arguing that Christianity is a true fact of the world. It's not like my opinion, right? It's not just my opinion.
Bow to me. All too easy.
Only Christians have an absolute moral standard. What's true about Christianity? I mean, the Bible's true, but basically the Bible is the word of God, and that's that's the word of God. So we start with the Bible as the authoritative word of God. And based on the claims of the Bible, we can do science and philosophy. Without the claims of the Bible, we couldn't do science and philosophy. It defeats skepticism, circular reasoning at its best, ladies and gentlemen, from the host. It's not circular reasoning because we're arguing about starting points. So how do you justify your starting point? Well, how do you prove your starting point? How do you prove your starting point? Because my starting point is Christ, right? That's my foundation. So what's your starting point, first principle? It's going to be what, like science, but that doesn't work. It's going to be, what else is he going to do? Some philosopher's opinion? I mean, what's your starting point? The laws of nature? It doesn't work. I think, therefore I am. Yeah, that doesn't work. Because I think, therefore I am it doesn't mean anything. What's the I? I is a type of unity. What is the I? What would actualize the I? Is the self a physical substance? Is the self a mental substance? Are you a simulation? Are you a dream? Are you like a material, physical thing? So I think, therefore I am doesn't tell me anything. It should be like, I think, therefore God. Yeah, but Daniel, if you say you don't know for sure, that leads to an infinite regress. Because if you're not certain of that, and I go, well, are you certain of that? And you go, I'm not certain of that. I'm not certain that I'm not certain. Well, are you certain that you're not certain that you're not certain? Well, I'm not certain that I'm not certain. I'm not certain. I'm not certain. Well, you're not certain. You're not certain. You're not certain. I mean, it's an infinite regress of uncertainty. It doesn't. So you never get anywhere, which is absurd. Okay, but then you. It's so funny. It's like they're preaching this cult of ignorance. They think that people can't know anything. They're preaching Nobody can know anything. I don't know anything. But it's a contradiction. How would you even know that you don't know anything, right? You're just constantly contradicting themselves.
You are nothing.
These atheists and agnostics, they're like ignorance evangelists. That's how I think of it. Like that. Have you ever guys seen that Eric Andre skit where he's an agnostic evangelist? And he has a sign that says God exists, maybe, question mark. He's like really passionate about God maybe existing. Ah. You know what? We should. That's actually what the evidentialist. That's what William Lane Craig is doing too. Because if you argue that God probably exists, well, then he also probably or maybe doesn't exist, or he might not exist. If God's only probable, then you can always be skeptical of God. So you have to argue that God's necessary. God is impossible. But the problem is to say God's impossible, like, what would dictate what's possible and how do you know what's possible and impossible? Because God is ultimate, and that which is ultimate determines possibilities. So like when when you even talk about like God's not possible, well, God determines what's possible. So how does that sentence even make sense? For you to say God's not possible, you're gonna have to tell me what would make something impossible that's not God. How would you know what is possible or impossible unless God existed to dictate possibilities? What in your system determines possible and impossible that's not God? Do you see the absurdity of trying to deny your creator, the Christian God? It's impossible. You can't rationally deny Jesus. You can only irrationally deny Jesus. What do you mean you don't have to know the answer to that? If you claim God is impossible and you don't know what determines possibilities, then you're not saying anything of substance, sir. Possibility would have no meaning with nothing dictating possibility. What would actualize possibilities? Are possibilities real? How do you know what's possible? See, I can talk about what's possible and impossible because God determines what's possible and impossible. And God designs my senses and my cognitive faculties to reliably detect patterns in an external world he also designed. And because of all because of God as the foundation there, I can do science. I can do math. I can make arguments. I can do philosophy. Without God as an ultimate foundation, you're going to have to say that there's like these brute facts that, like, logic is a brute fact or something. The uniformity of nature is a brute fact. My senses are reliable, but it's just a brute fact. But the problem with brute facts is there's no context to if you and me disagree on how to interpret a brute fact, there's no context behind the fact to say like which one of us is interpreting it correctly. Like, think about a book. Imagine you and me are arguing about Animal Farm, and I'm saying Animal Farm is about the Civil War, and you say no, Animal Farm is about the Bolshevik revolution. Revelation, right? I was about to say. If there's no author to the book, if there's no further context to the book, without that context, there's no way to say who's correct. I'm right that it's about the Civil War because I can interpret the book however I want. There's no inherent meaning to the book. You could say the book is about the Bolshevik Revolution, and you're also right because you can interpret the book however you want because there's no inherent meaning in the book. But now let's give the book an author. So now the book is written by George Orwell. And George Orwell, being the author of the book, can put intentionality. He can give the book aboutness. Now the book has meaning. So, because George Orwell exists and authors the book and intends the book to be about the Bolshevik Revolution and not about the Civil War, Animal Farm is about the Bolshevik Revolution. That's the truth. Okay. I'm just doing this as an analogy or metaphor. So now when we disagree and I say the book is about the Civil War and you say the book is about the Bolshevik Revolution, you're correct because there's further context. There's more context to determine which one of us is correct. So this is the same thing with like brute facts. Brute facts is like saying there's no author or there's nothing further behind the fact to determine who's correct. And if we disagree, we're both correct, basically. There's no way to determine who's correct about the brute fact. Whereas if Christians, we believe that there are no brute facts and that all facts are like created by God. So God is the ultimate foundation. He's like the author of facts. Like Orwell's the author of the book. God is the author of facts. And if you're going to deny that God's the author of facts, you're going to either have to say that facts are brute, which leads to skepticism, or you're going to have to offer that something that's not God is the author of facts. So then I'm just going to ask, like, well, if God's not the author of facts, then what is the author of facts? If your God is good, explain childhood cancer. God temporarily allows bad things to happen as a result of his judgment due to what like Adam and Eve did in the garden. And he allows bad things to happen so we learn not to love the world and we repent and turn to love God. We stop rebelling. Christianity Toxic, based on a book, a fairy tale written and edited by men over centuries. Yeah, but the book says it's a self-attesting word of God. That's the thing. Well, Jay, I would argue that without Christ, you can't avoid being brainwashed. That your mind will be manipulated by sin, and the only way to free your mind is to submit to Christ. It's kind of like a paradox. In Christianity, we achieve freedom by obeying God, because God is free. God is love. Love presupposes freedom. Sin is like slavery, right? Sin is a type of like bondage, and it's defeated. Christ defeats sin on the cross. Yeah, but when you say live a good life, good would have no meaning without God. If there's no God, there's no inherent meaning in the world. And if there's no inherent meaning, then you're not a meaningful agent. And everything you say is just like a fantasy pretend meaning. There'd be no real meaning. Nothing would actualize the meaning. Well, yeah, but if you say there's no inherent meaning in the world, then you're not a meaningful agent. So any meaning that you invent is just fake, right? You want to have a meaningless existence? Don't you think that that's pathetic? You want a meaningless life, but you don't live like that. No one lives like that. No, meaning is not subjective. That's self-defeating. Because you don't live. No one lives like that. People live like there's actual value behind like human life, for example. And B, it's self-defeating because truth is a type of value. Truth is a type of meaning. If there's no meaning, then there's no truth. So it's self-defeating. Like, I don't understand how people can be so heartless and say there's no meaning to life. It's so crazy to me. What is free will? Well, that's a pretty I have a different view of free will than most people think. Free will is just making a choice. But I don't really see free will. I think free will is more like becoming aware that you're determined and then acting otherwise than as you were determined. So determined, well, there's a lot of things that can determine us in life. Like there's material needs, right? Like hunger, thirst, boredom. Then what else? There's like social determines. You're sort of determined to be rational because it's like socially looked down upon to be irrational. That's a determination, like how your society, your peers perceive you. I don't know. Then there's like, I guess there's physical determinations, right? Like, I'm determined to unalive.
I mean, that's the transcendental argument. That's the argument that we make. So I'm not trying to reframe it into something other than the very thing we always argue here.
Okay, so let's assume. Do you think that the transcendental argument can prove Christianity just by itself?
We don't believe God determines everything, though, because God doesn't determine my choice.
Yeah, I think ultimately it logically leads to that, yeah.
But why? Why can someone believe in a kind of God that would allow you to have knowledge without being Christian?
Because not any kind of, quote, God does the actual work of grounding and justification.
Yeah, but we can get more specific. It could even be a triune God.
Well,
that's right.
No, at that point, it would just be a facsimile, a copy and paste of our position.
But it wouldn't involve belief in the fullness of Orthodox Christianity, and so it wouldn't be Orthodox.
Yeah, but the argument is for the whole paradigm.
But if you think that you can prove metaphysically.
Hey, Graven, it's proven with a transcendental argument for God. It's like a philosophical proof. Basically, like, God's necessary for knowledge. So if knowledge exists, then God exists.
That we need a triune God and the essence energy distinction and all that stuff. Someone could be convinced of that using your logical arguments, but not be convinced by the historic truth of.
Would I pray to God and forego medical help? I wouldn't. No, I would go. I would get medical help and pray to God. Why would it be? Why can't I do both? I don't understand. Why is it mutually exclusive? That's a false dichotomy, sir.
Christianity.
Again, we've addressed all this stuff a million times. The position is an argument for the entire world.
I don't hate science. I just hate that people treat science like something it's not. People treat science like a religion. Science is not supposed to be a religion, but people treat it like a religion. That's what I hate.
Including the historical account of Christianity, the incarnation. It's an entire worldview argument. It's not just an argument for the Trinity.
Okay. Well,
they do, Jason. You hear the evidence that people treat science like a religion is how they treat flat earthers. They treat flat earthers like scientific heretics, and they persecute them.
He left. Another impossibility, because if there's no odds, then you can't.
I mean, I don't agree with you on tag, really, the transcendental argument, epistemically.
Okay, well,
others.
Well, I mean, I don't think we have any other Roman Catholics right now. So, what do you disagree with?
Oh, I'm not Roman Catholic, but
no, I'm saying that there's not any other Catholics in line to speak. So.
No, I'm saying that like scientists should respect flat earthers because science is about asking questions and like never being satisfied with the answer. But they treat the sphere Earth as an absolute truth.
Go ahead and make your point.
So usually when it comes to the transcendental argument for the existence of God, I have a couple of questions about the assumptions of it. Does it like assume that that God has some sort of obligations towards us?
No, it is what's science. Tom, you can Google what I'm saying. Scientific truths are provisional, which means they're not absolute truths. So when you act like we can't question that the earth is a sphere. You're treating the sphere like an absolute truth. Now that's becoming a religious belief. Now we're not. Now we've gone beyond science. Okay?
Comes to our rational faculties, that they must correspond to reality at some level.
Sure.
So God does have obligations to us.
Oh wait, you said does God have obligations? I don't know what is that. I don't know what that means.
And look at this. Look at this guy in the chat. He says, "There isn't such thing as an absolute truth." Oh yeah, Tom? Well, you just made it. That's a contradiction. When you say there's no absolute truth, you're making an absolute truth claim. Dingleberry. I mean, these people just self-own themselves all the time, huh? I mean, what is wrong with them?
You weak, pathetic fool.
Science is not theistic. Well, how do you prove the fundamental parameters to make science possible? Pretty sure God is necessary for the fundamental parameters of science. Not sure. Word salad. So, to do science, the future has to resemble the past. How do you know the future resembles past to do science? How do you prove logic is correct? Because science requires logic as well. Can science prove logic? No. Can science prove the future resembles the past?
I'm
No.
gonna touch you, bro. I'm gonna touch you and you little ball sack, alright? Better watch your fucking mouth.
I don't. How does it follow that? Because if atheism is irrational, then so is Christianity. I don't see how that follows.
Is it necessary that God makes people basically rational, that our rational faculties correspond to reality as it is? And because,
Well, if by necessary you mean did God choose to set up the world that way because we're made in his image and that thus we are rational like him? Yes. If by necessary you mean was he under some sort of constraint of essentialism that he had to produce beings that way? No, because he created beings that are not rational. So there's no necessity to create all beings that way, but he chose to make man in his image. And so man has then a corresponding faculty of reason, which allows him to understand and study the world, and that the principles of the world match up to what's in man's mind.
so I can see how you kind of tie this together with the grand narrative of biblical scripture and revelation, with God like Imago Dei in relation to the Logos, right? And
sure,
okay, so I can kind of see. It's
okay,
not
but what's a problem for tag in any of that?
So usually when people are making the presuppositional approach, what I usually see some people object with is a type of epistemic fallibilism. Basically, because they're rejecting the foundationalism of an Aristotelian, but they will accept certain things which are necessary for reason, but other things are like our common sense faculties, like our intuitions towards, let's say, induction, or
okay, but those are not, that's not the same thing as like an epistemic view of foundationalism. So believing that the world is constructed a certain way, or that we have, you could even say we have axiomatic beliefs, The problem is not saying that those things exist. It's the account that's given for those things, or the assumption that those things are theory neutral. That's the point of contention. Do you think there's things that are theory neutral?
Well, it seems like for someone to even reason, there are things that you have to presuppose to begin with. And I agree with you
Yeah,
there.
but that doesn't have anything to do with it being theory neutral.
Yeah.
I mean, a foundationalist and a presuppositionalist, a coherentist, can all agree that there are fundamental things.
Yeah.
But
So I agree with you
hold on.
there.
So there's a difference between having foundational beliefs and foundationalism as an epistemology. Those are different things.
Yeah. So I was saying that I agree with you here, right? That there are things that are necessary for you to, be able to do to even have rational discourse. Like there has to be like real resemblances at some level for you to talk about cats, dogs, women, men. Aristotle is a man. To even do that syllogism, you need that as a real thing. It can't just be like a concept in your head. I get that, right? But it seems as if, how do I say that? Someone doesn't really need to have certainty about the reliability of the faculty in order to actually use the faculty. Do you get what I'm saying?
But I can concede that too without conceding foundationalism.
So you would say, then I would have a question to ask you. Then
there's plenty of people that don't know anything about epistemology and don't know anything about, grounding their, presuppositions or their axioms or whatever. But that really has nothing to do with whether foundationalism is true. I mean, the question ultimately falls on self-evidence. So I would say the two main issues are that I'm taking away here is that you would have to defend that there are things that are theory neutral and that there are things that are self-evident. And I just don't understand how anybody could, I'm not knocking you, but I'm saying if you're familiar with these disciplines and these principles, like how could you defend that? Like what's the proof for that?
Yeah, I definitely don't think that these things are in some way self-evidently true, because that would just fall into the common sense reliabilism of someone like, let's say, Thomas Reed, who would just be like, this is just common sense, right? But, common sense ain't that common, if you get what I'm saying.
Well, I think common sense, Reed and those kinds of people, like the Scottish common sense philosophers, like they also assume it's just another form of foundationalism and it's kind of pragmatism mixed in. But none of that has anything to do with like epistemic justification. They tend to kind of just dismiss it and hand wave that kind of stuff. So
yeah.
So, but what does this have? How's any of this a problem for tag? I'm still not understanding how this relates to tag.
So my thing is, when it comes to tag, is that I don't see it as really necessary to propose it for the reliability or actually the use or the usability of the faculties or reason. It just doesn't seem as if it's a necessity in a rational sense.
Okay, well then what is reasoning? So you're appealing to something that you think is more clear or more immediate or self-evident than God's existence, and you're saying something like reasoning. Well, I mean, what is reasoning? How would you give an account of reasoning without this sort of meta level picture?
Well, I'm talking about stuff like, syllogistic reasoning, like talking about logic.
Okay, so how does any of that? So if I ask you at a meta level question, metalogical level, like what is a syllogism? How do you give an account for that? That's self-evident.
I don't really think that's self-evident, but I would say that
But then you're admitting. Then you're admitting my
point.
point.
Like I'm kind of saying that, like, to participate in certain discourses and get.
So this is I see. This is the category error. So the use of the thing doesn't equate to the justification or the account of a thing.
Yeah, but I'm saying also at the same time that you don't really need to justify everything. Like it can be wrong. I can be an error. It's like a fallibilist type of thing. Like I don't really need to be 100% certain that this necessarily. It leads to skepticism at the end.
No, it doesn't lead to skepticism. It's a refutation of skepticism. So I think you're misunderstanding. Like what you just said would lead to skepticism.
Yeah, I'm talking about myself. That my view leads to skepticism at the end of the day.
Oh, well, then that's self-refuting. That's a defeater for knowledge.
Well, that's true. The problem would be that you have to reconstrue how you even conceive of knowledge to begin with in a total.
Well, so wait, you're admitting that your position leads to skepticism versus
Yeah, I admitted that openly, type of epistemic skepticism.
Well, I'm just so surprised that you said that. So
yeah.
Well, this is why tag is legit. It's because your position
I admit
is what it leads to. Oh, okay. Well, then, so you don't have to justify. If you don't have to justify knowledge, then you can't do argumentation, and I can be arbitrary.
Yeah, I also don't believe that. So it's like this really weird position I'm in as a person. I would call myself a type of fallibilist. That it's
okay. Ought we accept fallibilism?
Well,
he's going that way, but like you could also say, to even be a fallibilist, you need something absolute and unchanging to get probabilities. So even fallibilism doesn't even get you anywhere.
I don't believe in like moral oughts, but
okay, well that's another impossibility, because if there's no oughts, then you can't predicate the true versus the false. You can't say the good versus the bad, and that would undercut any kind of debate or argumentation.
I would also disagree with that.
How would you disagree if you just said that you don't believe in oughts?
Well, the thing is, when it comes to oughts and talking about truths, I'm not saying that you ought to believe in any particular thing.
Right, so there's no logical so there's no logical force to follow the true versus the false, and therefore your fallibilism isn't true.
It's how do I say this? Something not being, that you ought to follow the truth does not necessarily mean that that's not particularly true. I think that's a little bit a jump in reasoning there. So just because I don't believe in let's say oughts, that I ought to do X, Y, or Z does not mean that.
Okay, but every argument that you make, you're trying to, the presupposition is that your position is true and that people ought to follow it. And then you're saying, but there's no oughts and you ought not follow it. Okay, cool. Then I guess there we go. that precludes the possibility of debate.
They're just self-own.
Okay, I got a couple questions. So I was looking at the Bible, and I'm reading the book of Numbers, and it looks like there's like hundreds of thousands or millions of Jews that are in the census. And then I look and I see the book of Mark, and it supposedly has like 2 endings or like 3 endings or something. And I don't understand how you're supposed to be certain about your faith. Doesn't that undermine it?
Right. So there are scribal errors. I did a whole interview with James Snapp where we cover each of those topics. So if you're interested, you can watch the interview that we did with James Snapp, SNAPP, on my channel. And so, no, the Orthodox view, and actually I think most, even Protestants, except for maybe like some King James group or something, I don't know anybody who thinks that there's like one inspired, one per.
Hello.
Welcome. How old are you?
I'm 19.
Okay. What would you like to say?
I just want to know how atheism is irrational.
It's irrational because it's contradictory. They ignore evidence, and it's like an emotional, blind belief without reason.
Okay, so how do they contradict themselves?
If atheism were true, it would be a performative contradiction because the entailment of atheism would make knowledge impossible at the outset, and if knowledge is impossible at the outset, you wouldn't be able to say atheism is true. So it'd be undermined. It undermined itself. Yeah.
So I think you may be a bit confused because I'm confused how that's contradicting, considering atheists just believe that there is no God and you live for yourself.
Well, because it's like a knowledge claim, right? It's saying that there's no creator-creature distinction, but if knowledge is impossible, you wouldn't be able to know that. So it's contradictory.
The reason that we know that God exists is because of the Bible. So you have the knowledge from the book.
Well, not. There's also. I mean, creation reveals God. Everything in creation reveals God too.
And you figured out that God created that from the Bible.
Well, there's natural and special revelations. There's two kinds of knowledge that we get from God. So everything in creation reveals God, and then also that we have prophets tell us more about God.
So these prophets that you talk about, how are they telling you about God? Do you mean priest?
No, the prophets in the Old Testament, like Moses, Abraham.
Exactly, from the Bible, right?
Uh-huh.
So all this knowledge that you're quote unquote getting is from a book that you don't even know who wrote it.
God wrote it.
God did not write the Bible.
Well, it's the word of God, and he gave the authors the freedom to bear witness to his testimony.
So what you're saying is it's the humans' definition, like it's how the humans deciphered his words. So you don't even know if it's correct or not.
I don't know what you mean, but it's the word of God, so it's true because it comes from God.
But God did not write it. A human being wrote it.
Yeah, but where they would be like inspired, so God gives them like the permission to do that.
So God picked up the book and wrote his own crucifixion? No. I mean, how did they know that God got crucified? Because he went over there and told them? Like, all
Because
I'm gonna
they were around during that time.
they weren't around during that time. If they were around, they would have died too.
No,
Yes.
no, that's not what happens.
What do you mean that's not what happened? That's literally what happened.
No, and you read the story, like he has like Peter. Peter doesn't die, right?
Peter was not around when God got crucified. When the Bible tells you that he got crucified, it goes into detail about how it happened. If God did not write the Bible, then how does anyone who wrote it know he got crucified if they were not there? Because he told them?
They were there. What are you talking about? They witnessed it.
So you're telling me they witnessed men slam nails into Jesus Christ and sat there and watched so they could write it in the Bible?
Yeah.
So they watched their creator get nails slammed into him, wrote it down in the Bible instead of helping him.
Yeah.
Are you serious?
Yeah.
And you're saying atheism is irrational when you're speaking like this and you're a Christian.
Yeah.
So what I'm hearing is you are so far gone with your religion that you are allowing it to make you somehow warp reality.
Well, what's reality?
Realistically, two people who were there to witness Jesus Christ be murdered would not just sit there and write a book about it.
But if you don't believe in Jesus, like you can't. You said reality, but you wouldn't know what reality is without Jesus.
What do you mean I wouldn't know what reality is without Jesus? Reality is a word created by humans.
No.
Yes, it is.
No, it's not.
Time is a word created by humans.
No.
Months is a word created by humans. Years is a
No.
word created by humans. It's
No.
not created by the Bible. Sorry.
You're playing games. So like, there's a difference between a word is spoken, but then there's like a referent that the thing the word refers to. That's not created by humans. So I'm talking about the thing that the word refers to, right? Humans don't create that.
Time wasn't created by God. You know that, right?
So when you say reality, you don't have any access. You couldn't make any claims about reality without God revealing those things to you, right?
God doesn't reveal anything to me.
Well, then you wouldn't know reality. Now you're living in a fantasy. Now you're
Reality is the world that you live in. It's every day. That's a reality. The human definition word that was created by human beings means that reality is what you live in. It's the world in right now. So what are you talking about?
You don't know what the hell you're talking about.
I think you're confused.
I'm not. So
Like, the reality is it's literally what is happening to you right now. Like, are you confused?
I'm not confused.
I think you are.
We're playing word games and not really interested. So
What is the word games? I'm confused.
Fatality. Flawless victory. All too easy.
Perfect manuscript that we have, right? So no, there are scribal errors, and the situation that you're talking about with the numbers and numbers is clearly somebody like who copied that text, like adding a zero, right? But I think scribal errors are totally different from theological errors, because we don't have, like, we're not claiming that the whole religion is built on like one textual tradition per se. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I got you. But
And the same goes for the end of Mark. But if you want a whole discussion where we cover those topics, it's in this interview right here, and I'll put it in the chat for you guys.
So would you say it's possible to be like 100% certain about your faith?
I think if in terms of like what's possible for human certitude, yeah, I think that we have the highest level of certitude for things like philosophical categories and for our religious commitments. I think those would, in my view, those
like 100%, or are you going to acknowledge like it's possible that you're wrong?
Again, I would say that as far as human certitude goes, for me, those would be the most certain things. So I don't know about the.
you could say, like, what would it even mean to be wrong? If, like, what would be the objective standard for wrong?
Percentages, because I'm saying like,
It's so as a human, it's not possible to be 100%, is what you're saying.
no, I'm saying that as far as possible, as far as humanly possible in terms of certitude, for me, the theology would be first, and then like philosophical categories would be second, which the theology backs up, and then other things in my sense data would be less certain. So it's like 1, 2, 3 in terms of certitude. So for me, I can conceivably doubt a thing, but that doesn't mean that therefore I existentially doubt the thing, right? For example, let's take the laws of logic. Let's take something that's not theology. Can I conceivably doubt the laws of logic? Yes. But can I actually in practice go about my life doubting them and denying their existence and living a meaningful, coherent existence? No. But I can theoretically consider the possibility that there are no laws of logic. I think the same thing for God, basically.
Is certain, but you're personally maybe not certain.
No, I'm saying that I think they're certain, and I'm personally certain, but I can conceivably doubt them.
Yeah. Okay.
So I'm saying that, like, in my worldview, there's levels of certitude for things, and so for me, the most certain thing would be the existence of God. The second most certain thing would be philosophical categories like the laws of logic, meaning, transcendental categories, and then the third and perhaps least in comparison would be stuff like my sense data, my own experience, my own interpretations of this or that event. Those can be wrong, but that doesn't mean I have to be completely skeptical. So I just think that all human beings have kind of layers and levels of certitude to their beliefs.
So when Paul says no with certitude, he really means like no with certitude, but you can still, because I don't understand how I can have any sort of doubt at all, like even if it's just like theoretical doubt, and then be able to like repent, you know? That doesn't make any sense to me.
Any doubt?
What does that have to do with repentance? I don't know. Oh, what does that have to do with repentance?
Throughout the Bible, there are times where people doubt God. I don't understand why would that be a problem?
You lost me. What does that have to do with repentance? What do you mean?
Like, how can I confess faith if it's possible, if I have any like possibility of doubt?
The fuck?
Well, I think everybody's going to have times of doubt. So would that mean that because you had a period of doubt or you had a passing thought of doubt that you had no faith? That doesn't. I don't see why that would follow.
That's what I think it would mean. Yeah.
Why do people say this
So
shit? I don't get it.
nobody believes unless they have absolute certitude.
Yeah, I mean, you could believe, but
Okay.
you wouldn't have. Okay, I think I got it. So you can have theoretical doubt, but you need to have personal certitude.
What?
Is that what you mean?
Well, you were asking me specifically about my situation and how I view my worldview or whatever, and I was saying that do I personally, existentially, ever have doubts about things that are most certain to me? Sure, I'm sure everybody's had doubts about God's existence. And maybe if we go to confession, we confess, I had doubtful thoughts this week or something. And that's, I imagine a lot of people have an experience like that, but it's probably not most of your time or your, experience throughout the day. And that's different from, can I conceptually consider the possibility that God doesn't exist or there are no laws of logic, right? That's different than an existential crisis of faith or something. I just think they're obviously different things.
Yeah, but if you think that's possible, aren't you like constantly considering it and therefore constantly doubting?
You might be constantly, but you may not be constantly. So what do you mean?
Well, if you think there's any theoretical possibility of God not existing, how is that not a constant doubt? I mean, do you stop thinking?
Well, because by the fact that we have a lot of different thoughts and experiences throughout the day. So, maybe if I was preoccupied with that thought at all times, but who could actually be preoccupied with that thought at all times? Don't we have to go about our daily business and do a bunch of things? I'm just not understand. I don't understand what you're saying.
Well, I think I'm gonna have to spell it out a bit clearer and then maybe come back later.
Yeah, I think that if the expectation is that faith means that we have absolute, like, Cartesian certitude such that we can never have any doubts or never have any questions, I don't think that's possible. So, even in Descartes' system, like, he doesn't achieve that. So when Paul says that when Peter says no with certainty that, Christ rose from the dead, I think he means that, we do have the assurance of the Holy Spirit in terms of our existential, status, that yes, I do have certainty that Christ rose from the dead. I believe the scriptures. That doesn't mean that you won't be tempted or assuaged with doubts in your life. And the fact that you are doesn't mean, I've lost faith because I had a doubtful thought. You're going to be tempted with all kinds of things throughout your life. And if one temptation or one doubtful thought or one sin means that you lost faith, then nobody will be saved. It's just that would be kind of ridiculous.
Hey Jay, can I just ask something real quick?
Sure.
I think the confusion is over a psychological category versus an epistemic category.
That's what I was trying to explain. Yeah.
So psychologically or emotionally, I can go through different things and have doubts. But as far as what those beliefs and propositions, the sort of status that they have, they're not reduced to my psychological whims. They still remain within a certain epistemic category that would be said to be the highest certitude. Does that make sense? I think that's what you're trying to say, right?
It is what I'm trying to say, yeah.
I was talking to my friend about it, and we kind of came, he's like a physics guy, and we kind of came to the Cartesian, conclusion. Like, basically, two possibilities. One is that it's impossible to know anything, and nothing is real, and it's just like whatever current thought you're having, and there's no way to, like, prove anything. Or the other possibility is that God is real, right? You know what I mean?
Yeah, I would agree with that basic idea. Yeah.
So if I'm thinking that it's one of two possibilities, that's just like I'm constantly acknowledging that it's possible that I'm wrong, So
the problem with Descartes is he does confuse those two categories.
categories, right?
Yeah.
So he sets a standard of indubitability, the highest level of certitude with indubitability, which from his man-made system, you could just ask, well, why is that the case? And Jay and I always bring this up, simply because maybe I can't doubt something doesn't jump into automatically the category of justification or certitude. And so I think it relates back to exactly what Jay was saying, is not only is there fundamental confusion, collapse into those two categories of what I can do with my mind or my psychology is different than the justification. But Descartes starts with his mind. So he reduces all, which just pushes the question back, why should that be a justification?
Yeah, exactly. That's a whole epistemic position based on all kinds of assumptions. So you're assuming
And that proposition, can that actually be experienced and tested and observed in empirical data? The proposition that you just said.
Do I experience things?
No, I didn't ask that. I said the proposition.
Yet I experience things, and I can extrapolate things.
I didn't say
so
that.
that's how I give rise to what I do.
That proposition.
Dude, you need to let people finish.
Hold on.
You need to let people finish, dude.
Hold on. So you're expressing naive empiricism, which is a philosophical position on knowledge and knowing objects in the world. It includes all kinds of presuppositions, and they've been teased out countless times by many philosophers like David Hume. So all we're doing is asking you to tease out and give an account for the position that you have in terms of epistemology. And he gave a rebuttal that the very position itself, the phrase, I know what I know according to my, sense data, or however you phrased it, what matches up to my senses and sense data. That phrase itself can't be known by sense data. So that's a classic just critique of empiricism.
Yeah, I guess if you want me to say that I have to hedge my bets on some things which have to be true even though their truth is unknowable, I would have to just shrug and say, okay.
Then you have no argument.
Then you don't have an argument.
I wouldn't have an argument against whether or not it's knowable. I can have arguments
anything.
though.
No, you don't have an argument for anything at all.
Is it not possible to form arguments off of necessarily unjustified presuppositional beliefs?
No, you can't. That's exactly.
Then how do you? So are you saying that you are without?
Just ask me.
Hang on.
I have some presuppositional beliefs in which everything that I'm about to argue is dependent upon, but I don't have to justify that.
Wait, why don't you have to justify them?
That's your position. You just gave back
your position, dude.
I'm stating your position back to you. And
okay, good. So we're on the exact same page now.
If that's the case, you can't critique us, and we can just say we don't have to justify.
Yeah, what I'm trying to illustrate is what you just said. It was that position, and that means there is no argument. You're literally saying I'm going to say a bunch of things based on a bunch of other things that I don't have to. I just made a bet on.
If that argument contradicts experience, then it doesn't matter what you presuppose.
Now you're back to
question. We're asking for a justification that you can trust your senses, and you just keep saying my senses.
That's presupposed.
Yeah, we're asking for
the reliability of senses is a presupposition that I know is unjustifiable.
Asking for a justification for a belief in the principle itself, and you're saying I don't have to.
Well, for belief itself, I mean, the first belief that I have is that I'm capable of belief. Next question.
If you're going to be consistent, then we're just going to say, okay, you're going to get annoyed when we just accept that standard and say, okay, we don't need to justify our belief in God. Okay, next question.
Well, the issue is then, the more important question would be then, what is God?
We don't have to give an answer for that next question. It's presupposed. Do you see how that doesn't work to critique or to give arguments?
Is God just any presupposition whatsoever?
No.
Then what is God?
Do you see what I'm pointing out? Do you see what I'm pointing out?
Can we do? Let's do one person at a time.
Go ahead.
So, are you saying that presuppositions are necessarily unquestionable as well? That even if they are unjustified, we can't question. Even if we know that they were justifiable and unprompted, that we can't question them.
Hush for a second, please. So, we're not saying that presuppositions are unjustified. We're asking you for a justification. That's all we're doing. We believe they are.
Presuppositions are definitionally unjustifiable, though.
No, that's not true. You're totally wrong. We completely disagree with that. So you don't know what you're talking about. That's what.
How do you justify a presupposition?
By the impossibility contrary, by showing that it's a necessary precondition for the possibility of knowledge. This is what transcendental arguments are. That's what we do here.
Oh, this is the transcendental argument? Hang on. There's a paper. I'm trying to remember what it is. I know that there's a name, and I know that there's a paper that basically all but demonstrated the impossibility of like a transcendence arguments.
If you want, so I'm not interested in the fact that you knew of a paper one time. Do you have arguments that you want
I bet he's talking about Barry Stroud's paper, but Barry Stroud's paper assumes a false dichotomy between transcendental arguments and verification principles. Also, his paper is critiquing modest transcendental arguments, not performative transcendental arguments.
Because we just critiqued your basic empiricism, and you're saying I don't have to give an account for empiricism. Okay, then why? Then I don't have to give an account for theism, and you don't have an argument.
Well, the issue is that if we are to try to account for theism, you'd have to demonstrate the necessity of what you term God. That is, you have to define God for me so that I can determine whether or not I find that to be a necessary thing for the universe.
Yeah, but I don't have to do that if you've just...
You have to define it, then I will determine whether it's necessary or not. Nah.
Admitted that nobody has to justify their presuppositions.
I said that presuppositions are unjustifiable. That does not mean that there can be presuppositions that are wrong.
I just said we don't have to justify our presuppositions. So
that doesn't preclude them from the possibility of being wrong.
Okay, so then what's your criteria for determining the true and the false?
Non-contradiction is a good start.
Yeah. So, and how do you justify logic? Well, you're going to say it's what appeals, what matches up to reality, right? Is it also an empirical thing?
Logic is probably going to be extrapolated from the way that we experience things, yes?
Yeah, so that's what you said in the first proposition, which you couldn't justify, so now you're back to another circle.
The only thing that I can justify is that I have experience, and all things else are going to be sort of extrapolated from there.
You can't even justify that. That's why you keep not understanding the question.
Well, it's because it's kind of self-evident that I have experience.
Okay, then it's self-evident that God exists. If you can appeal to self-evident...
And what is God?
It doesn't matter because all I have to do, if you can do that in the debate, I can do that in the debate. So
wait, what is God though? Because I can describe what experience is.
No,
if
you
you
can't.
Want me to. I can.
You just said no. You can't. Are you aware of the problems of empiricism in terms of like the external world, in terms of
I'm literally a high school dropout. You're gonna have to drop down to like kid language for me. Sorry.
We're gonna move on. This is stupid.
I was going to play an Andrew Wilson video, but I'm like, actually, that might get me banned. Maybe not.
Logical justification to prove you're not a brain in a vat is what I was saying.
What?
Yeah, how do you prove you're not a brain in a vat?
I can't understand what you're saying.
Yeah. How do you know you're not a brain in a vat? Like, can you hear?
A vat?
Yeah. How do you know you're not a brain in a vat?
Brain in a vat.
Yeah. Like, what's your epistemological justification?
I think that the brain in a vat worldview would be basically would make knowledge impossible. It's just another version of like Descartes' evil demon scenario. And if that worldview is true, then really knowledge becomes impossible. Impossible in the sense that you couldn't justify that knowledge.
Yeah, and what's the problem with that?
Well, if knowledge is impossible, then you couldn't know that you're a brain in a vat.
Knowledge being impossible.
Yeah, but why would that make a difference then? If you're a brain in a vat, then yeah, it's what I know.
Okay, so why would it make a difference if knowledge is not possible? All right, let's move on.
Why would it matter if knowledge is impossible? Oh, you can't make it up, dude.
Objective matter and sensation.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Okay, but why is that true? How are we supposed to know that's true?
I think you're getting it misconstrued with this kind of vulgar materialism that it's like something I can...
No, I'm reading chapter 4.
Yeah, I'm explaining what I'm saying. I'm saying, I think you take that quote and you're saying, okay, what is it out there? I can't feel it, I can't touch it. But it's like, it's the...
No, I want to know the argument for why materialism is true.
Because the subject is not the privileged site of ontology of being.
What?
So subjectivity is not the
How does that
privileged site.
prove materialism?
Because that means the world acts upon us. It means the world is real. It means the world is material.
How does it prove that?
Because you are being acted upon. When you are born into the world,
how
you are
does
a
that
finite
answer?
being.
How does that?
You are a finite
How does
being.
that? How does that answer something like Sellers' problem myth of the given?
Explain that.
Well, wait a minute. You're the philosopher here, so you don't know
I
about
didn't
the
say I
myth
was a
of the
philosopher.
given.
When did I say that?
No, you're the philosopher here explaining materialism to us. So surely you would be familiar with the major objections to materialism.
What is that objection? Like, lay it out. If you're the smart guy, condense it. Say it to me.
But I'm not the materialist. I thought you. So you don't know the major objections to your position.
Well, offer one forward. You're not giving me. You're not presenting your case. Like, I've made mine.
Well, the myth of the given is the idea that the external data that comes in, that there's a correspondence or that there's a givenness or a pattern that exists, that the information that comes in matches up to the ideas in your head.
Yeah, but that necessarily can't be true. Like, an unconscious person can still be given information and they're not able to disclose that information in their head.
Like someone who doesn't have,
like someone who hasn't learned
the
language.
argument.
Someone who hasn't learned language.
You're not even understanding the argument.
Yes, I am.
No, you're not.
Yes,
Okay, what am I not understanding about it?
It's an argument against materialism, because materialism operates on the assumption of the myth of the given, that the data that comes in is meaningful.
Yeah, it's just Kantian jibber jabber. I know. Yeah, I know what that means. But I'm saying
not Kantian.
It literally
Kantian.
is. It's like
no, it's not.
Yes, it is.
Sellers is an empiricist. He's not a Kantian.
And what do you? Kant literally used a lot of Hume when he was making his arguments. Kant didn't fully reject Hume.
I make transcendental arguments. I know. I'm a fan.
Okay. So my point is being that, and it can be interpreted as the Kantian negation of what is being said. I understand that your mind plays tricks on you. I understand what you're saying.
Well, that's part of it, but the argument is that there's an assumed correspondence between the idea that's produced from the sensations and the meaningful content in the external world. And how do you know that that's the case?
Because of vibes, man. This is what I'm talking about. You can't rationalize.
Because
you can't
of
rationalize.
vibes.
This is like
because
what it
of
used to be.
vibes. Because
I'm
of
just going
vibes.
to jump into and just
Please
say
do.
that I don't know if you have some type of, if you're responding to some type of phenomenalism or something like that, but the fact of the matter is what you're saying about the subjectivity of consciousness certainly doesn't prove materialism, because you have all of Greek antiquity and Aristotelian philosophy that believes in immaterial entities, and real essentialism is being immaterial properties and substances.
Yeah, but because of vibes. Did you not hear the conclusion? The concluding argument was because of vibes, man.
Vibes, dude. Atheism is true because vibes. It seems true. It feels true. My feelings.
Yeah, I'm with you. My second question, I was wondering if you guys had heard of a concept in philosophy that's a supposed defeater of theism. It's called phenomenal conservatism.
I've never heard of that, no. Father Deacon, have you heard of that?
Yeah, this is a very modern concept, but what it states is that P is true as long as you intuitively believe that it's true, unless the defeater is present.
Yeah, Lewis brought up this objection too, and it just gets to it gets to the exact thing that I've been pointing out all the time. Is it just moves the question back? Why should I actually believe that that's true, let alone that's a
Welcome, Joel.
Oh, I didn't think you let me in. What's up?
Why wouldn't I let you in?
Anyway, I just saw you saying, I know which one I disagree with the most. Either science is a theistic concept or there's no slavery in ancient Israel. There's, I don't know. Do you want to, are these just things you objectively believe and you want me to argue against them, or are you going to elaborate more?
I mean, I don't know. Like, so yeah, there's in ancient Israel, you couldn't hold someone against their will. You couldn't force them to work for you unless they like committed a crime or something, right?
Can you not hear me anymore?
I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can. I think my internet got messed up. All right, so are you going to give any more context to this? Dive in, because I disagree with, I mean, almost all of these except maybe number one.
In ancient Israel, you couldn't hold someone against their will or force them to work unless they commit a crime.
How far, then that disproves exactly what you're saying. That is slavery in itself. I was going to ask how far back you meant.
What are you
just
talking
said
about?
there was slavery if you committed a crime. That if you committed a crime, you would be held as a slave. Right?
That doesn't count.
Even in, that doesn't what?
That doesn't count.
How come? That's slavery. Holding someone to do work with no pay.
Because when people commit crimes, then they lose their freedom and they become slaves. Because
all right. So what about? I'm going to. I believe you're Christian. So what about the biblical accounts of how?
Do you think we should release everyone in prison? Because they're slaves.
I don't.
So you think slaves?
Not really. No, they aren't. They're being paid for and cared by, the taxpayers' money. They're not slaves. They're people on punishment. There's a clear distinction between
so then there's no. So you agree with me that
slave.
then you agree with me there's no slavery in ancient Israel.
No, not quite. What I want to say is, like, if you believe the Bible, for example, the Bible's account of history, there's very specific instructions. I don't have my Bible next to me, but there's specific instructions of how the Israelites were supposed to capture slaves from their neighbors, when to do it, and to exclude their immediate, fellow brothers and sisters.
That's not true.
How come? What do you mean? The Bible isn't true, or what I'm saying isn't true?
Well, you're talking about Leviticus 25, but those are compassionate laws designed to protect people who are like destitute and poor. So that's like
no. That's there to protect slaves. I wish I could read it. I should have my Bible next to me.
It's probably better that you don't read it because it seems like you don't understand what's being said.
But I don't. I'm fairly sure I do.
I don't understand like how to interpret what's going on there.
I'm fairly sure I do. I was Christian for a long time. Very long time.
Okay. Well, are you familiar with Leviticus 19?
I could get it right now. I could open that right now.
Here's a Bible quote.
Oh, it's right. Oh, it's right there. Okay.
When a foreigner resides with you in your land, you must not oppress him. Okay. So do you think slavery is oppressive?
Yes, indeed.
Okay. So then, how do they have slavery if they're not allowed to oppress people?
No, you're heavily cherry picking the argument. They are not allowed to oppress their neighbors. People they don't know. However, when you have
foreigner, it says when a foreigner resides with you in your land, you must not oppress him.
That's not a slave. That's a free man, a free foreign man. I want to give you. Are you familiar with the quote that says,
"What
don't beat your slave"? Or it's the Bible. You just have to.
How do you, dude? If you're not allowed,
focus.
If you can't oppress someone, how can you have a slave?
Yeah. You can have slaves within your own community.
It says here, are you ignoring the book? Are you just ignoring what the book says?
Read the rest of the
It says when a foreigner resides with you in your land.
What does that have to do with slaves?
Okay, thanks for coming.
I had more to say.
No, you have nothing to offer.
I'll listen to you. I don't know if you want.
No, you're not listening. You're just bickering with me.
I'm not. You want to go on with me?
Yo, Precept, what's wrong with these people, Precept?
I don't know.
Yeah, he wasn't listening at all to what you were saying.
No, he wasn't. I was just playing these debates here while I'm waiting for people.
Oh, which debate? Between who and who?
I don't know. It's just Jay Dyer clips.
Oh, okay.
Justification.
Yeah, isn't it phenomenal question begging? Really, phenomenal question begging is what it should be called.
Yeah, I mean, why? Like, for example, it's similar to like when people say that, well, I'm justified in it because to deny it means I'd be involved in a contradiction. Well, that just pushes the question back. Well, why is that a justification? Or why is avoiding contradiction a good thing? Right? Oh, because and what is it again? It's just going to be positive. It's arbitrary, or we all agree to that, right? So with the phenomenal conservatism, it's the same thing. It's like, says who? So it's like, we believe the appearance is the phenomenal appearance, and unless you have a good argument against, why should I believe that? Why is that a good reason to? And you're going to find that because they ground out, it's a type of foundationism, actually, within epistemology. It is a more recent one, as you pointed out, but it misses the same point that every other position does. But it's like, that's not a justification. What's your justification that that's a justification? Well, and what they're either going to do is they're going to appeal back to phenomenal conservatism, right, which is viciously
Can I say something?
Or they're going to come and be involved.
I think, like, I've gotten a lot of people, like atheists, who appeal to like these epistemologies, right, like phenomenal conservatism, or like foundationalism and stuff like that, to try to justify, atheism, right? Trying to say it's a basic belief and stuff like that. But this doesn't work because, like, what has been argued multiple times from these Reformed theologians and philosophers is that under naturalism, right, this belief will entail global skepticism. And so they wouldn't be able to justify anything, including their belief in phenomenal conservatism or foundationalism or something like that, right? So they wouldn't be able to justify these epistemologies, right? Like phenomenal conservatism or foundationalism. And so, they're going to be stuck in global skepticism in a way.
Yeah, that's correct.
Yeah.
Phenomenal conservatism is just saying like, if something is intuitively the case, then I'm justified until there's like
that's right,
a defeater.
Yeah,
but that's not really. It's just there's no justification there.
Yeah, like some atheists might say, I have a seeming, right, or intuition. It seems to me that there is no God, right? And he's going to try to justify that belief based on that seeming, right, as an epistemic justifier. But the problem is how do you justify phenomenal conservatism itself, right? Under naturalism, you wouldn't be able to justify any of these epistemic theories, right? And so it fails, right? Like, naturalism, if it entails global skepticism, which it does, you have this fear for all your beliefs, including your belief in phenomenal conservatism or, foundationalism or anything of that sort, right?
An infinite regress, or they'll just be arbitrary. Just because does that make sense?
Yeah. It does. The last thing I'll say about it, and then I'll move on, let you guys get on to other callers. Thanks for having me. Is it does seem to me that that intuitive observation for most people is very powerful, and so I think that this argument resonates with a lot of people because most people look at things on a surface level. I don't think people question epistemology very much at all.
No,
they just kind of go off of observation,
right,
and what they see they kind of think is true.
Yeah.
And I don't know how you combat that exactly, because most people don't really want to get in depth to even the things that they believe,
right,
in order to justify any of them.
Sure.
So I just kind of hoping to speak on that.
I wrote a little something about phenomenal conservatism. So I state the definition: phenomenal conservatism is advanced to explain how a person may be justified in believing that P without basing the belief that P on any other belief. So it's a foundational, right? It's a type of foundationalism. So suppose that, so the idea is that a person merely...
Oh, someone was requesting that
believing that P gives, and this is from Richard Schwinburne, a person merely believing that P gives that person some justification for P, provided that the person has no grounds for doubting that belief. That's exactly what you said, Andrew.
Yeah.
And so suppose that person S has almost enough justification to believe that P, and then in addition, S acquires an appearance, right, the phenomenal, that P. Assume also that S has no defeaters, right? So that's the phenomenal conservatism for the belief in P. In this case, it's not counterintuitive to hold that S would then be justified in believing P. That's their position.
Right.
Real quick, here's my argument against it. Why does the inability to have a defeater constitute a sufficient justification? In other words, why are inabilities in general, or in special cases, epistemic in nature?
Because we can't observe justifications. Duh. That's what they would argue, right? They would just say, well, we can't observe the justification, so we don't need to. We don't have to worry about it.
So just believe what I'm saying. Don't ask questions.
Yeah, I agree with the guy in the chat who just says, just worship monkey and shut up.
Right.
So I quickly, yeah, go ahead.
Sorry about that.
No, go
I was
ahead.
just saying that, you know, from my perspective, intuitive reasoning is very powerful for people. And I think that they're going to gravitate more and more towards this type of thinking because people don't like to justify themselves. And I'm just wondering if there's like just a shorthand way to tell people you really ought to justify the things that you believe. You know, it seems difficult.
Well, I think the key there is the point that Father Deacon always makes, which is we need good reasons for our beliefs, not just any reasons, not just, quote, pragmatic reasons. I mean, it sounds like this is kind of just a pragmatic approach, like, you know, this is the best we could do, or this one seems to work, let's go with this. But we need more than that, right? Because all I have to do is give defeaters for why that's not enough.
Right.
But yeah, like you said, I mean, if they're not interested in going to that depth, then you're probably just wasting your breath.
Yeah. I know it's always hard to to get through to people. I think you have to start from where they're at, and most people are not at a place where they've even heard the word epistemology. So
that's true. Yeah. That's why you got to beat them over that. That's why you just have to get really proficient at beating them over the head with word salad. That's all I do.
You just get really aggressive and yell at them.
And use fancy big words that you're just reading off of a list. Oh yeah, well you're an idiot because transcendental category and also negation, apophatic, energy person hypostasis. See, that's all you do.
Well, I do have that signed copy of the big word salad written by Father Deacon Ananias. I bought that. It's very good.
A signed copy of word salad. It's just a book. It's just a book. That's actually what my book is. Just this giant book of like just incoherent lists of big words. That's all. There's no coherent. There's not a single sentence in it that even makes sense. It's just big words.
Well, there is that one sentence at the end. It says "I win." There's that one.
That's all you need.
The one statement right at the end. It's just
you just
big words
in the midst of the debate, just declared the debate over.
Yeah, Andrew figured out our grift. Basically, our grift is that philosophy and apologetics is just sorcery with words.
Yeah, exactly.
We're just throwing out, we're confusing and casting spells of people with really erudite, apophatic, indubitable, categorically imperative words.
Yeah, that's
you're conditioning and antithetical. You know what it reminds me of? Remember in Living Color? And they had that black dude in jail. He's like, my brothers.
Yeah.
You see,
Did your conjugational proclamation?
It is like that. Well, if you go underneath Matt Dillahunty's in the debate that I did with Matt on his channel, like all the comments are the atheists just saying that it's all words salad. He just made all this like as if these classic philosophy terms are they're just words I made up. Like I just grabbed them from a list and just threw them out. That's all it is.
I'm a Protestant that's been looking into Orthodoxy, and a lot of my Lutheran friends have just been sort of throwing out the accusation that all Orthodox are Pelagians and that they don't have a concept of original sin and all this different stuff. And I'm very new to this stuff, so I was just curious where you would point me in the direction of like learning about this.
Right. So we do not have the Augustinian view of original sin, and I would argue that the Augustinian view of original sin is actually fraught with all kinds of dangers and difficulties and inconsistencies. In fact, the Western trajectory of Western theology from Augustine on has itself grappled with and tried to figure out the problems within Augustine's view of original sin, which was inherited guilt, that we're all guilty because of Adam's actions. Why would God damn infants because of somebody else's sin, especially when Scripture, for example, Ezekiel says that nobody will be held liable for another person's sin, but everyone will die on the basis of their own sins. And so it's a false either or categorization to characterize the West as Augustinian and the Orthodox Church as Pelagian. In fact, it's a lot more nuanced than that. And in fact, the Orthodox Church in many places condemns Pelagianism, but it does not have the dilemma of specific Western disputes about semi-Pelagianism. Although I would argue that if you're really into the nuance of it, we also disagree with a, quote, semi-Pelagian view too, depending on what you mean by that. But no, in fact, what's missing in this whole Lutheran take is Lutheran errors about Christology. Lutheranism doesn't understand the cosmic scope of Christ's redemption, which is something unique to Orthodoxy. Lutheranism is fraught with tendencies towards Manichaeanism, where evil is given a kind of subsistence, a kind of being. The will of man, according to Luther, it doesn't exist. There is no free will at all. If you read Bondage on the Will.
Actually, I think that's a huge problem with the Orthodox is when they say that evil doesn't exist.
Okay. Yeah. So, Precept, what do you say? What do you believe in original sin?
Yeah, but I don't think we're guilty because of what Adam did. So Adam's sin enters the world, and then we learn sin from the world, and then we're guilty for our own choices and actions. We're not guilty for what Adam did. I would agree with you.
Do you believe? Are you a Molinist, Precept?
I don't know. Darth said he leans towards Molinism.
Yeah.
So I know the Calvinists are against Molinism. I don't know. I tend to like align with Darth, I guess, a lot on a lot of these things.
Yeah, like if you believe in divine foreknowledge and divine providence and libertarian free will, that's just going to be Molinism, right? If you combine these three things.
Yeah, I suppose I believe in Molinism then. Yeah.
Yeah, I think like what's really cool is like if you believe in Molinism, then you can. There's going to be like a beautiful theodicy called like the supra. Oh, someone came.
Hi.
Talk with this person,
welcome.
then we can. Yeah, hey Michelle, how's it going?
It's good. How are you?
We're good. Michelle, are you an atheist?
I am.
Oh, okay. Do you have something you want to ask or say? Or?
I just want to ask what the objective proof is that Christianity is somehow real.
So we make like a transcendental argument. We say that God is like a...
That's not objective proof. Do you know what proof means? It means verifiable evidence.
Yeah, so we would prove things with arguments.
Well, that's not proof, sir.
So Michelle, can I say something, Precept? Michelle, are you a scientist? Do you believe in scientism, that all knowledge is derived from science?
I think that all knowledge is derived from objective observation. So yeah,
that's self-defeating, because how do you then define? How do you then justify that belief itself? How can you empirically verify the belief in science?
Now you're saying that there's
verificationism.
Now you're saying there's no such thing as objective facts.
No, I'm saying to say that all knowledge should be derived from empirical verification, which is a view called verificationism, is going to be self-defeating, because how do you then empirically verify verification itself?
She doesn't understand what you're saying. A good thing.
Oh, okay. So verificationism is when you empirically through observation, when you observe something and you verify it through observation, right? So verificationism is a
Right.
view
So
that
if
says
I run an experiment, my neighbor Joe Bob can run the exact same experiment and he can get the exact same results.
yeah, but you're saying that all
Verifiable
knowledge
truth.
is like that, right? And we're saying that's self-defeating.
I didn't
because
say.
then
I
how
never
do you
said
justify
all
it?
knowledge is like that.
Okay, cool. Not all.
Egyptian.
Okay, so you can have knowledge
There's
that's
something
not
called
empirically
literature.
verified,
Like
right? Through
I can
observation.
know,
Egyptian,
I can know a ton about Harry Potter, and
Yes, what?
someone else can read the same Harry Potter book and get something different out of it. That's a type of knowledge, but it's not verifiable truth.
Okay, so
Sure.
let's-
So you can. Okay,
okay.
go ahead, please. I was just saying you can have knowledge without empirical
She's not
verification.
gonna.
Yeah, go ahead.
Egyptian, you're going like too academic. She's not gonna. She's not gonna understand.
Sorry, Precept. Go.
So like, you want evidence, right? So let's.
I just want some evidence. I'd be happy to believe in it with evidence. I pride myself on having an open mind, and I'd be happy to change it. I'd believe in Thor if he showed me evidence that Greek mythology or Roman mythology were correct. Or I just need proof.
Okay.
I need evidence.
Okay, so like you would agree that you're speaking to me right now, so that would be an evidence, right?
I mean, that's the reality that I'm living in. There's evidence, like you can look on my phone and see that I was connected to a thing. My words can be written down and recorded. So yeah, there's
Okay, but hold on, Jesus, what the fuck? You're
What do you
talking.
mean, what the fuck? I just said a sentence. Why are you upset?
You're bloviating. You're bloviating. Relax. Okay,
I'm
you're
not
talking.
bloviating.
You're going on and on about nothing. You're yapping.
Did
Okay.
you look at an SAT list
Dude,
today? That's cute.
Oh my God. So you're talking. That's. I'm going to use that as evidence. That the fact that you're talking is going to be my evidence, right? And I'm going to
Well,
say
evidence for what?
God.
That's not evidence for God. That what an
According
asinine.
to who? I'm trying to demonstrate it. Will you fucking relax? What the fuck?
My dog can talk. Does that mean that there's a dog god?
Dude, okay. Well, I'm just gonna. I mean, you're not even giving me a chance to explain myself. What the fuck's wrong?
Can you please give
You
me a chance
haven't
to
given me
explain?
proof. I'm just asking for
I'm
evidence.
trying to. You're fucking like insane.
Yeah, do not interrupt him, Michelle. Do not
Me
interrupt.
talking is not
Yeah, do not
evidence
interrupt.
of God. That's
Focus,
ridiculous.
Michelle. Focus. Oh my
Stop
God.
interrupting.
You're acting like an impulsive 14-year-old. Okay, so for you to talk, certain things have to be true. One of those things, for you to talk, there has to be some sort of order or uniformity in the physical world.
Yeah, physics, chemistry, biology,
So like
all explainable. Every last bit is explainable.
Every time you say the word ice cream, it sounds the same. Because if in a world where there was no uniformity in the world, every time you say ice cream, it would sound different.
So you think because there's a timeline, there's a God? Is that what you're trying to say?
No, I'm saying that there's a consistency to the physical world, so that every time you say the word ice cream, it sounds the same. It doesn't sound different. Every time you say ice cream, it doesn't sound different, right?
Right. Well, I mean, I could say ice cream, ice cream, ice cream, ice cream. Yeah, I could say it lots of different ways.
Thanks for coming, Michelle.
So you have no argument.
Yeah. Well, I'm just gonna go make lunch. That's pretty disappointing. I got this.
Wait, Precept, you're turning off the live?
I was thinking about that, yeah, because no one's really requesting, and I'm hungry, so I was gonna take a break. I might go live later.
Okay, I'll join. All right, man.
That was crazy. That
Yeah, she didn't allow you to speak at all. Yeah.
So. Okay. Well, I'll be live later, so I'll talk to you later, man.
Talk to you, bro. Nice talking to you, bro.
Okay. Well, I'll be live later, so I'll talk to you later, man.
Talk to you, bro. Nice talking to you, bro.